of two discussions this week being Sexual Abuse and Sexual Violence Awareness Week in Britain. It's a huge subject, terrible and huge subject, and it's so big that we can't possibly hope to address all of the issues this evening in the hour and a half or so that we have together. So we are focusing on the myths around abuse, asking what the myths are in this particular context and how we can go about demolishing them, and whether in fact any of the stereotypes about abusers and the abused are in fact maybe helpful. At the end of the discussion, we hope that those of you who are listening in will be minded to find out more about the subject for yourselves. We use this conversation very much as a departure point to discover more about the good work that the people that we're going to be hearing from this evening are doing in their various fields. Towards the end of the discussion, you listeners will have an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists yourselves. Please do that in the comments section of our video link. Before I introduce our speakers, I think it's helpful if we establish the wider terms of reference here. So this evening we're going to be talking about the sexual abuse of children, the forcing or tricking of a child into or a young person into sexual activity. It's a horror that's hidden from view, but research indicates that within these shores, 1 in 20 children at least are abuse victims. And we're talking too about sexual violence towards adults, unwanted sexual acts, including rape and the sexual assault of men and women. And research indicates that 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence in their life. So to ponder and answer these difficult questions around the myths and stereotypes, we've got 4 people who are experts in their various fields. We have joining us from Israel this evening the psychosexual therapist Yara Niv Burrell, who works with abuse victims in Israel, but also here. The top barrister, Charlie Sherrard, who helps put their perpetrators behind bars and who's been instructed on various high-profile cases, including the first female genital mutilation case in the UK, if I'm right. Yeah. And you're also, I think, Charlie, a regular expert on the Nick Ferrari show, a resident legal.
If I can get up early enough.
Okay. And we have Emma Harewood, the person who I think it's fair to say did more than anything to set up Lighthouse, the UK's first one-stop shop and safe space for child victims of sexual abuse. And Yehudis Gold-Sobel in the top left there, and she is the founder of Migdal Emunah, which supports the victims of sexual abuse in the Jewish community. And she set that organization up in 2013, I think, after going public about her own experience of abuse. Yehudis is also the co-chair of the Met Police Independent Advisory Group on Sexual Abuse, and you are in fact also the founder of this week, of the founder of Sexual Abuse and Sexual Violence Awareness Week, which I think is now in its 5th year, Yehudis, is that right?
Yes.
It was founded in 2016. I'm going to start with you, Yehudis, if I may. It's a big question, but the myths, what are the most common myths around child sexual abuse?
one common one we face a lot of in the work we do is that if I just teach my children to say no, they'll be protected from sexual abuse.
Yes.
We hear that, I would say, several times a week. I guess as parents, we feel it gives us a bit of control of the situation. If we just teach our children to say no, it's sort of ticked off that list. But actually, do we think or believe that children would say no to an adult that is in a trusted position to them, someone they might look up to, a teacher, someone in their close family? The answer is most likely no.
Yes.
And it's sadly become a new model of how we base a lot of the education. So it's almost a bit like we're passing the responsibility of safeguarding children to children instead of taking responsibility ourselves as adults to safeguard children.
Yes, yes. If I can ask you something immediately, you mentioned there, and I think in your second sentence, that it could be difficult for a child to say no to somebody that they trust, somebody who is in their daily lives. So are we normally talking about a person of trust? Because that is certainly one of the received items in this area. And that's not a myth, is that right?
Well, the myth is that the abuse has happened by people we might not know, or we might encounter one-off. I think the last research a few years ago found that over 90% of the people that responded to this research actually knew the offender. So whether it was someone in their immediate family, extended family, school network, community relations, they'd actually known the person who had sexually abused them as a child and young person. I guess that leads into another myth that, you know, it's just the stranger that's in a bar that night. Or, you know, we've just met now for the first time and they're the offender. So most times it isn't.
Yes. Okay. So saying no, Yara, could you take the baton?
Yeah. The question? I didn't hear you.
Oh, so I asked really what is for an example, one of the most potent myths around child abuse, and Yehuda said that it's the assumption that a child can simply say no to somebody who is trying to lure or trick them into sexual activity.
Absolutely, actually, you did summarize everything. Actually, to say no, it's protecting us from being abused. But from my experience working with children and adults who've been actually survived sexually abused, it's not the no, it's to know that they have to say, this is my body, you can't touch. So the education, when parents come to me and say how I can prevent that to happen, I say, to say no, it's not enough. It's to teach your child about his body, about his body. This is my body. Nobody can touch it except that my parents, even the parents can abuse the child, actually. So what we need to teach our children is to be responsible for their body and to protect their body. That is my experience working with adults or with children. When you explain that actually the neighbor or the babysitter touch them and it's not right, the children can say, but I said no, it's not nice. But they don't understand that no, it's not enough. It's actually acting, going away from the situation.
Okay. Emma, can we put that question to you? The myth that saying that when we teach our children to say no, that is a good part of the problem dealt with.
I think we have to be really careful. We can't put the responsibility on the child to say no. That actually the issue is the adult or the person perpetrating that sexual abuse. And whilst it's really important to teach our children, I do agree, we can't hold them responsible. It's got to be the adult that needs to know and take accountability for their actions. And I think that kind of links in, I suppose, with quite a big myth for me, which is that there's often a lot of myths around why children don't tell. And the Children's Commissioner did some really interesting research that showed 1 in 8 children and young people don't tell at the time when it's happening. And for some men, it can take 20 years to tell.
Yeah.
And actually, there's lots of myths about that. And I guess the myth is not that the child wanted it to continue, but actually often when you ask children, young people, why didn't you tell? They say, no one asked. No one was curious. I was acting out at school, or I was trying to show you with my body by being cross or angry or whatever it was, but no one actually asked. If someone had only asked, I would have told them. I think there's a real duty on us as adults, and particularly as professionals, to see those signs and just be curious and ask, because I think many children would then have more of an opportunity to feel able, because they're incredibly conflicted, because as Yehudis has said, if the person that is perpetrating the abuse is someone known to them, they are torn between loving that person and loving the attention and loving the affection, but knowing it's not right and wanting it to stop.
Yes.
So it's a huge expectation, I think, for us to expect them to voluntarily just tell us.
It is. It's also, it strikes me as a huge expectation of parents to ask that of their children, simply because it goes so against the grain for most parents. They wouldn't knowingly put their children in a situation in which they can abuse. So but if I've understood you correctly, it's crucial that parents do ask those questions. I mean, how do you frame that though as a parent?
I suppose it's giving children a space to talk. I think it starts with the things that we've talked about earlier. So things like the NSPCC pants rule, things that that teach children what's good touch and what's bad touch, what's okay and what's not. And then I guess it just might be not asking a direct question, but if you see a change in your child's behaviour, if you see them suddenly becoming more withdrawn, or not wanting to do the things they wanted to do, or not wanting to spend time with a certain person in your family or your extended friendship group, is asking them, why is that? What's happened? Is there something that you want to share with me? I don't think we need to be very specific, but I think we just need to let the child know, I've seen something that's changed a bit in your behaviour. Do you want to tell me about that? What's causing that?
And what if you haven't seen those changes in your child? Or will one almost inevitably always see changes in a child who's been abused?
I think children are very good at hiding things, and we have to realise that for some children, they may not realise initially that what's happening to them is sexual abuse. They might just think that's what happens in families. And it's often when children first get the more detailed sex education, particularly around year 6 and 7 and 8, that they might suddenly realise, gosh, what's been happening in my house isn't what normally happens in other people's houses.
Right.
So they're really important times and opportunities for teachers. One of the most common people, apart from a mother, the next most common person for a child or young person to tell is someone at school. In fact, often the teaching assistant, the person that's just there and available for those conversations.
Yes. And in your experience, are those conversations held between children? So they do go to teach. Children do go to teaching assistants and adults in the school.
Yeah, which is why I think we saw a bit of a drop off when the children weren't in school. We see a drop off in referrals. So usually, even pre-pandemic times, we see a drop off for Easter holidays, summer holidays, Christmas holidays. Like a slight dip in referrals, and then a bit of a peak September when they go back to school or when they first go back. And it's been interesting in the with the pandemic, we were imagining in September, when the children went back to school, we would see a massive increase in children coming and telling, but it didn't really come through till November. It took a while for the children to find spaces to talk in school, but through November, December at the Lighthouse, we've been busier than we've ever been since we opened. So we've really seen a big increase.
Yeah. Okay, Charlie, once there has been disclosure from the child, I think what most of us aren't sure of, and maybe you could explain, is what are the steps thereon? How easy or difficult is it for abusers to be punished by the system? What's the journey after disclosure of the child?
How easy is it for them to be punished? Well, there's a long process. Can I, again, I don't want to change your question, but just to bring some positivity, because there are a lot of myths surrounding the difficulties, perhaps, that children, that people who have reported abuse face. Because I think from their perspective, there are an awful lot of fears in the process that they may have to undergo, which perhaps need to be debunked, because we've come an awful long way.
Okay.
But the difficulty is getting the message out.
Okay, and what is the message we need to get out?
The message is that there are an enormous number of special measures that have been brought in over, I guess, the last 20 years to protect the complainant, to make it easier to give evidence, to disclose. So firstly, for example, to give an interview instead of making a witness statement.
Right.
So most people that may be watching this may have been involved in some kind of incident that engages the criminal procedure, and they have to meet with the police, and they feel that they have to write a statement using their words. What's happened is the skill of training has enabled people to sit in an interview room with witnesses. I mean, in the FGM trial that I did, they even interviewed a young girl as young as 3.
Wow.
And you know what? It was staggering how she coped. We just assume as adults that children just won't be able to handle it, but they are far more robust in many ways than we are. And they don't have the preconceived anxieties that we might do. And they would sit down in a very sanitized environment, knowing how, having been through another measure that's come in, for example, which is vulnerable witness training, where we are all trained, barristers, interviewers, police officers, protection officers, to ask questions that actually get the most out of somebody without extracting the fear and the anxiety. And this will come out in an interview that may last 45 minutes. There may be more than one of them. That will actually then be the evidence.
Okay.
And that is an enormous protection right from the word go, because it's preserved. So what people may have encountered over the years is somebody that makes a disclosure on, for argument's sake, the 1st of January. And then the court process was such that between then and, say, June, July, they would start to have second thoughts.
Yes.
And then they might have to go and give evidence.
Yes.
And then they might think there's been family pressure on them not to speak. Or they forget things. They have nightmares. They have all sorts of matters that come to them that make them clam up. Doesn't matter anymore. The evidence has been protected by interview.
Wow, well, that's a very significant development. Yeah, and very reassuring. Okay.
Could I just come in there and add something for the for certainly people that are local to our area, to North Central London, that are listening? One of the things that we can offer at the Lighthouse, which is the service where I work, a sexual abuse service in North Central London, is exactly what Charlie's described, is an interview for children in a really lovely child-friendly environment, either led by the officer that's investing their case, or sometimes we even have them led by a child psychologist who's been trained by the police to deliver police interviews, so they can even further than the officer adapt the way the questions go. which has been really helpful for the children, who've said to us things like, it's been so good just to be able to tell you my story today and know that, as Charlie said, it's recorded and they won't have to do that again.
Yeah. Yes.
But then another very exciting announcement on the back of that we've just had recently is, later on, as it nears the trial process, children are often cross-examined by the defence and asked further questions to probe and check their evidence. And with a new special measure called Section 28, those questions can now be pre-checked by the judge to check that they are in plain English, understandable to the child, that there's not too many. We've just been given permission to be able to record those interviews at the Lighthouse as well. So children now that live in North Central London won't need to go to court unless they particularly want to. And for some young people, they do actually want to go. But for the majority of the children that don't want to go to court, they'll be able to not only have their evidence captured, but they will also be able to be cross-examined in advance. Which is a huge relief. It means they're not sat on tenterhooks through that week-long trial thinking, when's going to be the day that I'm going to be called? When will be the time that I'll be called? Because they've already had that captured and pre-recorded.
Well, that's very cheering and very significant development. Is it fair to say that there are certain stereotypes about the young people who become victims?
This is a hard one. It depends where we're looking, and especially like in our community. So like looking at the Jewish community, a lot of people say, I bet you have lots more victims in the Haredi community that come to you, that children, because they don't have the language. And I don't yet have research or evidence. We do need to do that, which is a project on the side that who knows one day we can, work on. But the children that we've worked with that come from the Haredi community and the children we've worked with that come from the rest of the Jewish community have been no different in terms of like the sort of stereotypes that people have maybe portrayed.
Yes.
The only difference we've had is the language. So the terminology they use would not be the correct names for body parts. They're like totally biologically incorrect. But then again, we have found that to be across the spectrum. We've had, children that have come to us who actually have pet names for body parts. So while one side doesn't necessarily have the language, and it's a bit of a like, everyone says, well, they must have more abuse because they don't have the language. We've not yet seen like a significant increase in the children that we support from there. What we have seen the difference is the response to a disclosure is vastly different in the Haredi community than the rest of the community.
Can you go on? In what way?
This is like it's leading off a bit from the myths and stereotypes, but it's the way in which anyone responds to a disclosure can make or break it. And oftentimes in the Haredi side of the community, the way in which they respond creates a secondary trauma. And I would say every single client we have worked with from the Haredi community has referred to it as another trauma. It's just a negative response. It's counterproductive. It's harmful. It's silencing. It's just everything that is wrong. Everything that we don't want to do to children and young people or adults that disclose sexual abuse and sexual violence. Everything we want to do is have a listening ear and so on. That's the major difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you want to.
Yes, I wanted to say that about the second trauma, the client that I had in the past or have now, I can say 99.9, the response in the community was, you ask for that. You are to blame. you know. So in the Haredi, if this happened, you behaved like that and that, you asked for that. Otherwise, he is not to blame. It's you to blame.
Well, that's certainly that's not a new notion. So that in fact is not a myth. That is the truth. Yeah?
That is the truth.
Okay, and you found that, and that's that problem is particularly acute in the Haredi community.
Most of it,
yeah.
because they are more clothed and they supposedly not behaving like other community, that they are wearing other clothes, you know, more open clothes and that. So if somebody touch you, it's because you ask for that. You behave like that. You dressed in that dress and you made yourself available. Even young children.
Yeah, that's an extension of the abhorrent idea that women who dress in a particular way are inviting abuse. I guess it's the same line of
I guess it leads into it leads into what's a myth and what myths become belief.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a myth that's taken hold.
Yeah, very firmly
in that community.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I need to ask now then, how do we go about demolishing that? Because it's not. It might be particularly prevalent in the Haredi community, but it's certainly not limited to it. So, Emma, what's the best way of disabusing a brick that people of that erroneous idea?
I guess I'm probably not the best person to advise on how to get the message out into the community, but I guess I can confirm with what you were saying. So many young people have said to us, the reaction of the first person that hears you is highly significant. And that sometimes as parents, a first reaction might be just a fury at the person that's done it and a desperation to see justice. Some young people have said, and one we're working at the moment with an adult survivor who was abused in her childhood, and she comes and speaks to the parents that come to the groups at the lighthouse, and her feedback to them is that her mother was so passionate about winning and getting justice that she forgot to just love her daughter. That and she said, I just wish she'd just loved me and looked after me. And there is a real myth, I think, that by getting justice it'll be okay. Like if you get a guilty plea or someone's convicted, that'll make it better. And that's a huge myth, because I think for many young people, whilst that might be a positive outcome, it doesn't actually make it better. It doesn't stop the fact that the abuse happened. And actually, if that person was someone in your family, there's again really mixed messages of being pleased that they're guilty, but again equally upset that you've ruined your family by your grandfather or whoever it might be.
Being so in these terrible situations, again, a slight departure from the death myth, but it's such an important question that we need to try and answer it. So when abuse has taken place within a family, let's say, how should families go about healing? Trying to helping the child to heal. If justice in the courts is not enough, that's not going to surprise anyone. So how do you go forward after that? How do you restore the child?
You're asking us?
I'm asking. Well, I was going to ask Emma, but if anybody else would like to speak before her, that's good. Emma, is that something that you're?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we found is incredibly helpful is not just supporting the child, but supporting the whole family. So we've been really acutely aware in the lighthouse that we can provide all the therapeutic support in the world for the child, but if their mother or father are falling apart, or even if their siblings are just completely rocked by what's happened,
Yes.
that's really important. We need to support a whole family in these situations, because we may have parents that don't know, they wouldn't be able to go to their usual social network. They wouldn't be able to speak to the people they usually speak to.
Yes.
Because of the taboo and the shame of what's happened often.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that's been really valuable at the Lighthouse has been providing a parent group where they can come along to, it's not a therapeutic space, it's a psychoeducative course where they can learn about what's happened, how's their child being impacted by the trauma, how should they as a parent support them, right through to really practical things around how do you talk to your child about healthy sexual relationships in the future, particularly if they were abused at the age of 10 or 8 or 12. How do you start the conversation when they're 13, 14 about healthy sexual relationships? How do you keep them safe without smothering them? So we found that that's been really, really important to support families and not just the child.
And I would imagine that families also need help, parents need help on how to restore their relationship with their child, because the child is going to feel terribly betrayed, let down in many cases.
I guess
the parents need help with that, knowing what to say.
I guess each situation's quite different. Some families, some parents are incredibly supportive of their children, and for some it's really hard. For some, they're not sure whether to believe their child. They're not sure whether to, who to side with, and even more complex if it's siblings, one sibling that's abused another sibling, or a step sibling that's abused another sibling. It's incredibly complex because as a parent you love both children. So I think it's too difficult to generalize, because each family situation needs its own bespoke package of support depending on exactly what's happened.
Yes. Charlie, can I?
Karen, I must say one word that I think is the key for healing or start of healing, and I'm talking from the clinical work, is the belief, to believe the child that that's what happened. And here, the moment that you say, I believe you, I listen to what you say and I believe you, here the point that the child start the healing process. It's a long healing, yes, it's a long process, but this is the first step. The belief that I believe you, that happened to you.
Yes. Yehudis, you're nodding furiously there.
I agree with both of them. What Emma's described is exactly how I would say working with our client group is exactly the same. Every single case, every family needs and wants different things. And the power in someone close to the victim and the survivor saying that I believe you is, immeasurable. And I guess that's what leads to what I mentioned earlier about the secondary trauma, when you get the total opposite response. Instead of anyone saying even, I hear you, don't even say I believe you, but if you just say I hear you is probably a better step than what a lot of people get, which is disbelief, or you're lying, or, I can't imagine this happening, it just doesn't fit in my worldview. And that's counterproductive. So yeah, I totally agree with both of them.
Yes, because it might seem obvious, but it's not something anyone is going to make up.
No, and I guess that leads to another bit, that loads of people make it up. There's so many false claims of people being abused or sexually assaulted, which I'm going to...
that's a notion that has a lot of currency now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's it's a worryingly growing phenomenon. You hear that a lot in the pieces that I've written. People I've interviewed have said that to me on several occasions.
And my response is, why would someone want to make it up?
What would their motive be?
Yeah, why would you want to be let's be honest, in this day and age, we all like to put people in boxes and we categorize people, and you come from that part of the world and that part of the country, and you look like that, and you know, so everyone loves to put people in boxes. Why would you want to be put in a box as labeled victim and survivor? Why would anyone choose to want to be going through this journey of, you know, utter torment? Because yes, there's the abuse, but the therapeutic journey is not a straightforward path either. But I'm going to hand over to Charlie for that one, because yeah, the fake, the sort of lying cases.
Yes. Charlie.
I guess we're in a era where we'd like to think that we've moved on from the notion that people make things up, but yet actually we've probably, thanks to Donald, gone the other way round. That I guess we are questioning disclosures.
Yeah.
And we're questioning everything more than we used to.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's healthy at all.
No.
So people, again, you come to me from the court process. I still think there is a great notion out there amongst the jury world. I've never sat on a jury. I'm absolutely, and I'm allowed to. I'm intrigued to be picked. But
I bet, yeah.
I still believe there is always the view of 12 people, which is show us some physical proof.
Right.
And this is one of the, and Emma will probably know this as well, this is one of the real dilemmas in terms of presenting the evidence. Because on the one hand, you want desperately to make sure that the disclosure doesn't add to the pain. So that the video process, the giving of evidence process is not meant to extract more anxiety, more stress, and relive torment. But yet jurors, if they see that somebody is sitting there completely fine,
composed, yeah,
they're thinking to themselves, well, why, if this person's been abused, why aren't they crying?
Yeah.
Why aren't they shaking? And the problem is the skill of the interviewer is to ensure that they don't add to the pain.
Precisely, yeah.
And there is that real balance, because we have to, in the court process, in my view, for a successful prosecution, you need to keep looking at what is your audience going to be thinking. And your audience in that sense is the jury.
Yes.
And ultimately, I think in some senses, if a complainant, if anybody is capable of actually going to court,
yes,
and staring down the abuser, that is so much more powerful and cathartic. But not everybody is capable of doing so. And so all options need to be made available. Yeah. But what people need to know as well, and I spend most of my time defending, so I'll put my hand up to that, but there are very, very strict rules now. So there's the perception from all the movies that we stand up there and we postulate and we shout and we abuse in court. It just doesn't happen. That there is great protection, for example, from other things like Section 41, which prevents sexual history coming out. A lot of girls, particularly in the era of social media, might be terrified.
Very worried, yeah.
Really worried that somebody is going to trawl through their Facebook accounts, through their Instagram, looking at some of their Snapchat stuff and trawling, parading it through a court.
Yes.
It doesn't happen. There are
that's
very strict rules about that. Yeah. Intermediaries are very commonplace to help translate the questions from people like me to make sure that nobody is confused. And in many ways, the judges as well. I mean, in due course, I sit as a judge, but judges that try cases involving sexual abuse have to go through a course themselves, have to be specifically trained, because again, unfortunately, judges in the past have been caught up with the myths and have perpetuated them.
Yes. And
still do. Being trained.
When did judges start to receive training in this area? I've never heard that.
Oh, I'm obviously not old enough for that, but it probably, Certainly, I think in the last probably 10, 15 years,
Okay,
judges, I mean, you can sit to do general crime.
Yes.
Then you have, in order to try sex cases, you have to be accredited. You have to go through, firstly, a sifting process to be selected.
Yeah.
And then you have to go through a proper training that then itself receives continual education anyway.
Very reassuring. Yeah.
And likewise, prosecutors, they can't restrict the defense lawyers. Prosecutors have to go through training as well, have to be selected onto specific panels as well, because very often that is the person who has the contact with the complainant.
That's right. Yes.
Either make them at ease, or in the past just make them feel rubbish.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that again, hopefully,
yes,
it's never going to be eradicated, because people are people and we're humans and have bad days. But generally speaking, there's a lot more empathy that goes through the court process.
Yes, which is absolutely crucial for justice. Okay.
Could I just come and pick up on a couple of those really important points that Charlie made there? The first one was just around the medical and the physical evidence, and there's particularly in younger children, there's, I guess, in a sense, there's been a myth over the years that if there's no physical signs, it didn't happen, and so the doctors at the Lighthouse are very careful to write that in their letters, in their examination notes, that just because there was no physical sign, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean abuse didn't happen. People that perpetrate sexual abuse, particularly on young children, are very careful and very measured and very slow and very gentle, and over many years escalate the abuse, and therefore there are often not physical signs. There was some national research that showed just 4% of children had physical signs, and we did out of the children that came to the Lighthouse last year, in the over 13-year-olds, so a slightly older group, just 18% of them had physical signs, and that's quite a small number even for that older age group, where it's more likely to be perhaps a more violent assault. So I think that's a real myth that's really important. It doesn't mean it didn't happen just because there's no physical sign. Yes. And I think the other thing that Charlie mentioned was around that children, if they're not crying, if they're not upset, then it really happen. And a really important part of the training that judges and barristers receive is around the impact of trauma on children and young people that have been abused, and around a phenomenon called disassociation. So to cope with the trauma, often children and young people will disassociate from their feelings. They won't allow their brain to engage with the memory properly in their feelings, and so therefore they can have this quite cold, calm, collected presentation, when inside they're in an absolute turmoil. And I think for me, I'm just really passionate about finding a way that juries can have some kind of education before a trial. I would love
that was my next question, because it's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's fantastic to know that professionals working in this area are receiving the right training, and that question of the recognition of just how manipulative and careful abusers can be. It's so important. And but what about those people? What about the 12 men and women sitting on the jury, Charlie?
I guess everybody brings. I mean, this is. Look, I'm passionate about what I do, and I love the jury system. You don't know what baggage they bring with themselves. And I remember doing. It's amazing how you can sense something. I did a rape case, or must have been about 20 years ago now, where even as the prosecution opened the case to the jury, I could sense that one of the jurors was having flashbacks. And it became obvious. So it told me, and at a very early stage, jurors aren't just people, and they bring their own preconceptions. I mean, I went to university in Norwich. Now, I wouldn't want to think about what goes on within families necessarily in certain of our shires. But then you then begin to wonder, well, how fair is the trial process going to be if what you're hearing is the norm?
Yeah.
So picking up on what Emma said, we haven't yet got to the point of cases having an expert witness. And I think that's still a little way to come.
Yes.
And what I think, unless I'm mistaken, what Emma was envisaging, not necessarily calling out for, but describing, was somebody to just explain sex abuse, child abuse is often just about control. It may not have any physical manifestations at all. I mean, I've got a case coming up where there was a contract that was written. It's extraordinary.
My God. Wow.
Yeah. A contract where the word no was excluded as being anything to prevent activity.
My God. I mean,
it speaks for itself, but
yeah.
I think it's the more subtle variations in human behavior.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you end up
almost
transgressing into the jury's realm, because they do have to assess
on what they
and very often it is a really difficult task for them.
Yes.
And the burden of proof is on the prosecution, and they have to prove it to a high standard.
Yeah.
One of the matters, just in passing, knowing that I was coming on this evening, that I was just talking to about some colleagues in my trial at the moment, is the concept of civil action case, which is hardly ever used in this country. But there have been cases where, to avoid the stress of a jury trial, and also to avoid the burden of proof and its standard being as high as it is, that simply to have the recognition that somebody has abused, somebody has assaulted, cross that line, you can take that to the civil courts. Doesn't need to be under the big spotlight of the criminal justice system and all that brings.
Yes.
It means sometimes a cost.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm a great believer that I actually think more civil actions should be brought.
Yes.
And once the process begins, I've got absolutely no doubt that funding will be found.
Well, yeah.
But it's a cheaper process.
And more cases will be brought.
And they'll be quicker.
Yeah.
Don't have to, at the moment, we're struggling in courts with jurors, with COVID, and trying to make sure you get from A to B with everything that goes with it.
Yes.
The civil cases are more straightforward, and the evidence is often written down.
Yes.
So just as a side point, that one.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, because another myth you've just reminded me of is a lot of people, I don't know if this is specifically for our community or more widespread, but is the assumption that when you report to the police and you go through court is you're doing it for the money.
Yes.
Every single time we've had anyone go through court.
A particularly pernicious myth. Yeah.
People are like, they're just doing it for the money. And it's a bit like, where in this criminal justice system do you perceive there to be money or a handout or a win, aside from someone who just wants to seek justice through the criminal justice system, because that is just what they want and they need. So that's another big myth about sort of once you report, you're just doing it for the money.
Yeah.
Not even the lawyers get that. Just one thing as well, just to try and, because I'm all about, particularly in this pandemic time, all about giving out positives. Another one that a lot of people aren't familiar with. So you get cases, and I'm sure, Emma, you'll have taken them through, and everybody else, that end up in guilty pleas. And in some ways, that is unsatisfactory to some people, because they feel like, yes, they've been believed, but they've not actually had a finding in their favor. Somebody has made a deal, whatever it may be.
Yes.
One of the advances in our process that has really moved on is the notion of victims of sex abuse or any kind of crime making an appearance at court at the sentencing process and speaking.
Oh,
A victim impact statement, and Crown prosecutors, prosecuting counsel, etc. They used to just rubber stamp it, read them out. Now they realize actually it's a really important part of the process. And they come, even, you know, family members will come and say, look, this is what the impact has been on our daughter, whoever, and it's very powerful in an open court, and you get closer to closure that way.
Yeah, it makes total emotional sense. Yeah.
Going back to the guilty plea, I think for some children that's, whilst as you say it hasn't gone to the court and you haven't had it from the jury, actually there's a real relief that it's done, that the process is over, and that even with the guilty plea there will still be a sentencing and they can still see justice in that way. I think one of the real big agonies for young people particularly, who are probably perhaps a bit more aware of what's happening, is just the length of the process and the drawn out nature of it, and that sometimes it feels like the alleged perpetrator is in control or might have the upper hand because they can change dates or say they can't make something, and the processes can often go on and on, whereas at least once you get to that point of a guilty plea, it's done then, and it draws a close to the process, which can be really helpful.
So, as you said before, there is no one size fits all to any aspect of this. I think one thing that's become, it's very cheering to know how much legal processes, how many the developments that you've been describing, Charlie, but ignorance in society at large, I'm sensing, remains a real problem. So we've touched on some of these myths that are potent and believed, and that's and of course victims themselves are fooled by them because they live in that society. So what can we try? How can we try and address this? How long is it? Just a question of time? It's a question of more, I don't know, articles being written, of more convictions, which and the kind of slow fact that will gradually have on sections. But there seems to be a sort of tension and sensing between the advances that have been made in the legal arena and the beliefs that people still have in society at large, which victims can find discouraging. And
I think there's a couple of things that are sort of coming to a bit of a head, really. So since 2015, when I first reviewed the pathway in London, what the pathway that children would experience, things have changed quite significantly in that 5-year period, particularly. And there's things like the inquiry into child sexual abuse is due to finish next year and report in 2022. Has just released this last week a child sexual abuse strategy, and they're about to release some guidance on that. We're just coming to the end of, I think, 4 years it is, with the Child Sexual Abuse Centre for Expertise being in place and all the research that they're doing and pulling together. And it feels like we're coming to a bit of a head where we will get to a point where there'll be enough information to be able to share with the public that we can start to raise awareness. But I think some of the fear has been around. Children are often second-class citizens. So from 2005, we've had adult sexual assault referral centres across the country. There was a mandate in 2005 to open sexual assault referral centres for adults, and up they sprung. And many of them do support children, certainly teenage children, but we haven't got that for children yet. And I think there's probably a little bit of a chicken and egg. We're getting this massive growing body of evidence of people coming forward, and we can get to a point where we can really bust some of the myths. But if there isn't a service in place for children to go to, I wonder if that's a little bit of the hesitancy certainly from the government's perspective to to really shout it from the rooftops. But it feels like there's a momentum and that something's coming.
Yes. You concur, Yehudis? Yeah.
Of course. And I guess also from the other perspective, more on the ground perspective, all it takes is for one person to say something, for it to sort of light a spark in somebody's mind and to question their thinking around victims and sexual abuse, or what they think they might have known, or beliefs they held and they don't even know why they held it.
Yeah.
The more we talk about it on the ground, the
Yeah.
more someone...
That's what I was getting at, really. How are these ideas best disseminated?
It's two-pronged, isn't it? You need a government strategic approach, but you also need, on the ground, people to just be having more open discussions about it. It's not, abuse might be something that happens behind closed doors, but the conversation around it doesn't. It should be actually on the forefront. It should be everyone talking about it, because we all have this responsibility. And I think that's probably why I started the Awareness Week. It was just to, while yes, there are people in government positions and sort of strategic lead positions having these discussions about how we can scope the landscape in however many years to come and make it better, there is also lots of discussions that we can slowly have on the ground. That also means we're slowly talking to people. The next generation will have a better language, a better understanding, maybe less judgmental, less myths. This is wishful thinking.
Does the very fact that, we can be said to live in a more open and less deferential age, is that, and with every generation that's more, is that helpful?
Partly. Yeah.
Contributory factor, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, because I think it still comes, I've still heard younger people also saying how she was asking for it, or I thought it was a yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's, the more we hear, the more we see, the more we question our own beliefs and our own thinking. We're meant to be constantly evolving, as is our thought process. And I think the more we question it and think about it, people hear about it, and I think the greater the discussion, the more awareness we have.
Yeah. Yara, do you see those? Sorry, I haven't heard as much from you as we would have liked. Do you think that those conversations are gathering pace in the Jewish community here and also in Israel? If you look back, do you see a difference between where we are now and say 15, 20 years ago?
Definitely. But I think in the last 3 or 4 years since Me Too started, the awareness of sexual abuse being open and people are talking about that, maybe less on children, and that is our responsibility as society to educate the people around us, that if we can hear, if we listen to the child, maybe we can help him. If we see a child, as Emma said, that behaving differently, let's ask him what's happening. To educate people, to ask and not be afraid to ask, and be brave enough to be involved, maybe with one question that lead to the teacher to ask more and investigate. When you see a child in trouble, immediately we need to know that we need to do something about it. If the teacher or counselor at school.
What are the red flags, if you like, for a child in trouble?
Listen, Emma and they talked about not having physical evidence of sexual abuse, but sometimes what I found, the people that I worked with, that they develop mental behavior, like they're acting strange, that people will say, maybe you don't see physical damage, but I'm not okay. So I think that the best example for me to give, it's not a child, it's an adult, that when I was here 3 months ago, I got a letter from a psychiatrist in London that say that this adult man is untreatable, he has mental issues, borderline personality, and this, that. When I read this letter, I said, oh my God, how I can treat him even. And I came back to London and I met this man. It's completely the opposite of what the psychiatrist described.
That's
just
very worrying. Yeah.
Pardon?
That's worrying.
It's worrying.
Very
Yes,
worrying.
very worrying. I was sitting in front of him and just listened to him. And he said, you know, everybody labeled me all my life, is 47 or 50, and nobody listened to me. Nobody said, I believe you that you've been abused since 10 years old. When he was 10 years old. So this is a simple example of an adult for years taking all this abuse and nobody listened to him. And he didn't want to show any physical, it just became mental. So everybody around him said he had borderline personality, schizophrenia, this and this, everything he had.
Yeah.
But actually he wasn't.
Can I ask? Yeah, I think it's fair to say that within the Jewish community, of which I'm a member as well, you know, there is this idea that yes, sexual abuse takes place, but not in the same proportions as it does in society at large. I know there hasn't been any hard research in this area, but all the indications are that it takes place in the same proportion across the Jewish community. So from the most secular to the strictly Orthodox, and that the techniques and the manipulations of abusers, you know, are the same everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we found. It's abusers are the same everywhere, and like I said earlier, it's just the response that's different.
Yes.
But the grooming technique, the manipulation, the control, it's all
strategy
across the spectrum, and I think it's pretty much the same across the spectrum of society.
Yeah.
I think the only difference we have found is in the response to disclosures, how the disclosure is handled, and what happens after that. That's the biggest difference. But yeah, the sex offenders are the same sort of almost everywhere.
Yes. And that response, if you were to encapsulate it, so within, I think I know what you're going to say, within the Haredi world, it's particularly difficult for victims to come forward and first come forward and then be believed, right?
Yes. Yeah. You know, the majority of the people that come and report to us are self-referrals.
Yeah.
And for the other part, they are people in schools, people with contact with the children, who are, like Emma mentioned earlier, learning support assistants, teachers assistants. They are the ones that notice something is off very quickly, or a child is not quite behaving in their same way. And they are the ones that get in touch with us. And oftentimes when we try to work with them, they come up against management issues. And that's almost where the disclosure sometimes doesn't come properly if you go into the more Haredi part of the community.
Yeah.
Even though we have this member of staff who is desperate to help and can clearly see something is amiss, you also need to empower the parents to almost take control of the situation in a way that they can report it to the relevant authorities or find out what's actually happening with the child, or even take the child to therapy. And a lot of times it takes us a lot of time and effort to sort of hold the hands of the parents as they make this decision, and we help them to make the decisions, and we just sort of put everything in front of them so that they can make informed choices. Yeah. And none of this information is readily accessible, sadly, across the community. It's slowly getting better in recent times. We have got a lot more discussion around it and more awareness, but you know, in the more Haredi part of the community, this information is so far from accessible that people have to, I refer to it as run around a bit like a headless chicken, trying to find the right agency or the right therapist, or where are we meant to go with this, because I just don't have any idea.
There's the problem just of the dissemination of information per se, isn't it?
Yes.
And when you're not meant to be reading newspapers and watching television and going online, then you're not really part of the national conversation, are you?
Well, exactly. And then where do you go if something happens that is not described or already put out in front of you by the leaders in your community? You know, then you're a bit like, wait, I'm supposed to question this on my own. I'm meant to think about this. Where do we go when there's no mapping? Which is sort of the biggest issue.
Yeah, but there have been a couple of high-profile cases within the Haredi community, haven't there, of paedophiles who've been put behind.
Very, very few in the community,
but some.
Yeah, and it's totally down to the courageous victims and survivors
of their victims.
Yeah, because you know they've not had any support in doing it at all. You know, we've supported a couple through the court system, but for the most part, it's taken sheer strength of their own individuality to sort of make it get to that point.
Yes. Yeah. Excuse me while I look down. One thing when we were talking yesterday, Yehudas, and I was asking you for ideas of things that you thought we should discuss here, you posited something which has been, which I've been pondering ever since, and you said, are some of the stereotypes that exist around abusers and abuse, can they be helpful? What did you mean when you said that?
I can't remember what we were discussing. I've had way too many discussions in the past couple of days.
Okay, all right.
I think I was more questioning, do we ever see or do we think stereotypes can be helpful?
Yeah, because there are stereotypes around abusers, aren't there?
There are. And I think I was maybe going to put it to Charlie.
Yeah.
Because I know that you get such a select few of people that ever, you've only got 12 people on a jury, and it's really what beliefs do they hold, and are any of them helpful, or are they totally not? I mean,
one that I have, that I'm aware of, and I've been aware for a very long time, is of the adult who's not a family member, but who seems very keen to spend, an awful lot of time with children. So it could be an avuncular figure, it could be, or a family friend who seems to kind of enjoy spending almost more time with that child than their parents do. Usually, often a childless person. Now that's a figure that I think with which most of us are familiar. Is that a myth? Are we talking myth or truth?
Gosh, I'm going to leave that for Charlie. I always do say to people, most notably to parents, that for me, it is a slightly alerting flag if there is an adult that has more interest in spending time with your children than you do, who is not paid to do so. So if they are not your nanny or your nursery setting or in a school, why is there some person who is more interested in getting on the floor and playing with your children for too much? Is it founded? I don't know. Charlie, Emma?
It's the truth. It's not a myth. The number of cases I've done over the years where a stepfather will have, one of the worst I did about 5 years ago, there were 4 generations from the same family of both sexes. And what was extraordinary, and again, he was my client, but I actually had to say to the jury, in terms of stereotypes, don't judge a book by its cover, because he almost came dressed as Jimmy Savile. He actually wore to court a shell suit. Extraordinary, but it was almost like a uniform. And you would imagine that these are myths, but they're not. And very occasionally,
Mm.
when I was more junior, we used to get bored at court because you would sit there all day. Instead of being in a trial court, you'd be in a court where all of the preliminary hearings were taking place. And you'd play a game of sit there and look at the doc and decide what they've been charged with before anything was announced in court.
Yeah.
And again, for some reason, stereotypes used to become truisms. Now, those are the more glaringly obvious ones. It's the subtle ones.
Yeah.
Which are the majority. So again, the stepfathers who just a part of the furniture, lovely personalities.
Yeah.
Nobody could imagine. They've got character witnesses that come to court. They're very, very well steeped in the community, whether it's Jewish community, whether it's Christian community, whatever it may be. And it often seems to be, in fact, religion is a convenient cloak.
Mm-hmm.
People couldn't imagine that
Yeah.
such a person could do such a thing.
Well, it's a wonderful cover, isn't it? Yeah.
It always is. It's the way into connection with children. And very often that's how they justify not having their own. They give of themselves
Yes.
to others.
Yes.
And of course, that's not to say that everybody in that position is an abuser, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
It is one of the most difficult areas for a jury to unravel. It really is.
Yes. Emma, have you?
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting to me, listening to you saying that, is that there might be a slight bias then in the cases that make it to court, or the cases that make it to a charging decision by the CPS. And we know that for children, that's a very, very low percentage. I'm going to get my numbers wrong, so I won't say, but it's like something in the region of less than 10%. I mean, it's really tiny, because the children that are referred to the lighthouse, and obviously at this point we must refer to them as alleged perpetrators because they're referred to us right at the beginning, straight after disclosure. 40% are family members, so that would include father, brother, grandfather, mother, stepbrother.
Mm-hmm.
But 20% of them are people outside of the family, and those are often a neighbour who's always looking after the children, but often a music teacher or a sports teacher, or, as you say, someone in a position of responsibility or authority. And about 20% of them are their peers, so young people of a similar age that have abused them. And it's interesting that actually it appears then that the ones, I'm going to have to go away and look at this now, but it appears as though more of the people that make it through to you, Charlie, into the court might be those people that we might put in that stereotypical box. It might be that the overly kind neighbour, or the new stepfather, or the new boyfriend on the scene, or because that doesn't mirror the beginning end, of the journey, the referrals that come to us.
Yes. Take a look at it's 9:20, and we're meant to be wrapping up in around 10 minutes, so I guess I should look at, so if questions have come from people who are listening to us,
that have come through,
are they going to be on my WhatsApp, or are they going to be?
They're on your WhatsApp.
Okay. Okay, questions. I don't think they are.
So I've got one here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, there are. I'm sorry.
Oh, can you see it?
Yes, I'm sorry. There's a long list of messages, and I'm just found them. Okay. So somebody's asked a question that is specific to the Haredi community, and it says, and the question is, how can we expect Haredim to educate their children about their bodies if they have no education themselves? I guess they mean secular education there. Biology is not on the curriculum, but even where it is, relevant pages are glued shut. Very pertinent question for that, about that community. So that the not naming of body parts, the language of euphemism.
I don't.
I imagine it's particularly criminal, but it you know, for a child to must be horrendous to have to listen to a child describing the abuse that's taken place to them, and they haven't got even the most basic vocabulary to describe that.
Yeah, I think the most shocking experience I once had was I had a 38-year-old man try to describe the abuse that he experienced, and he still did not know the correct names of his body parts in English. He called it a thing in Yiddish. And I often use this example when we try to do pre-COVID times, education workshops with parents, because teaching your child the correct name for the body parts does not mean you have to continuously go over it.
No.
They tend to remember it, and it makes the difference between one of them coming home from school while you're cooking or on the phone or trying to do something else, and them saying, mummy or daddy, someone tries to touch my thing, to you very easily dismissing that. But if a child turned around to you and said, I just came home from school and mummy, daddy, a child tried to touch my penis, you are going to stop what you're doing to listen to what your child's got to say, as opposed to if they said thing. So I think coming back to the language, we're not going to have the Haredi community correctly labeling body parts or teaching children biology overnight.
Anytime soon, no.
No, that's wishful thinking. What I would hope is that when the government do introduce relationships and sex education, that we all open arms accept it, because there's another myth coming in a minute. The amount of parents that come from the religious part of the community that have sent me worrying messages, questioning what the government are going to force us to teach and show our children videos about sex. I mean, no, they are not. Relationships and sex education starts with the very basic for children. Yes. It is just about body ownership, about children taking care of their body, about different family dynamics and setups and how people can have a relationship. There's no element of sex. And if they want to think that sexual abuse is only about the sex, we're fooling ourselves, because there's so much more to it than there is, the act, so to speak. So I'm not quite sure how else we can teach the Haredi community or the children, but I do, I've done so many of those workshops with parents over the years, and even if they start to openly discuss with their children that they have a right to look after their own body and the correct names for body parts, which you could just do fleetingly in the bathtub, and it's just, you just reiterate it every few months, or and then they know it. That's already a start. But it comes back to me saying that actually the grown-ups and the adults have the responsibility to prevent sexual abuse. So while we can teach children how to disclose things, if it were to happen, it really comes down to, are we ready to respond appropriately? How are we going to respond? Do we know what we're going to do after that?
Yes. Okay, very moving question now, actually, and more open-ended. Do you think there is hope for victims? We hear so much about how abuse damages people and causes lifelong problems. That's Emma.
I would say that if children and their families get help and are able to talk about it, that there is hope. That so many children and families that come to the Lighthouse service would say that, they found a safe space to talk, to be listened to understand, and to have the conversations, supportive conversations with their parents or parent. Many of them leave much more hopeful. It doesn't ever go away. It's never going to go away. But actually they leave much, much more hopeful.
Yes. And familial relations can be restored to a point, and
with the
non-abusing
family members.
Yes.
I think also from my perspective, when it comes to victims and hope, I think we're only looking at the victims and survivors that have disclosed to us or to people around us. If we look at the numbers, it's, I think 1 in 4 girls or women and 1 in 6 boys, this was done quite a few years ago, have experienced some form of sexual assault or abuse before their 18th birthday. I think this was the NSPCC research a few years back. Now, if you think of those numbers,
wow,
actually, we know so many more victims and survivors than we even think we know.
Yes.
And how many are functioning members of society?
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
You know, working in every different role. It's a bit like anything. It's, you know, it's just another thing that has happened to people in their life, and it doesn't mark them indefinitely. It doesn't mean, you know,
you have to define them. Yeah.
No, not at all. And, you know, we like to penalise the ones we can read about or the ones we do know about, because the comment section is always the worst place to look, but it gives you a nice dose of what society think sometimes. And there's so much judgmental opinions, myths about victims and survivors, when in fact, if we think about the numbers and how many people we know in our circles, we probably know handfuls of victims. We just don't know that they're victims and survivors.
Don't know who they are. Yeah. Charlie, would you echo that?
Absolutely. I think there is hope. As I was listening to you all, I was just thinking from what we've seen this last week. Again, it's always an extreme example, but having watched one of my own community talk about his experiences in the Holocaust, and you just think he went through all of that and saw humanity, and everybody should have hope, but everybody needs help. And it's finding the comfort, it's finding the ability to disclose, it's finding the ability not just to move on, because that phrase just means you just swept it aside, but it's making others take responsibility for their actions and being able to have a fully functioning normal life and not carry around what is perceived to be the stigma. You know, Jews are great at carrying around guilt. You know, victims of any sense carry around that sense of,
yes,
what did I do wrong? And it's all part of debunking those sort of myths that will enable people to go through a process and come out the other end, hopefully stronger.
Yes. Yara, any additions?
I will summarize and say hope is my belief that, yes, exactly. This is the only thing that helped me to help this victim, with hope. Hope that somebody will be there for this child or this adult. And that's all. I can't say that it will be everywhere, because there is a community, very close community, like in Israel, Mea Shearim. Nobody will go in. And I don't think that, I want to believe that, please God, somebody will come in and do something. But really, we have to accept that this community will not open, and that will continue. But I have hope that somebody will do something about it. That's all.
Okay, and I think I have one final question. No, I have one final point. It is in fact 9:30, so Yehudis.
I'm just going to lastly throw in, thank you, Karen, for chairing us. And I'd also like to thank our brilliant panelists.
Yes.
Just thank you for sitting on the other side of the computer on your evening to talk about more sexual abuse that we do in our daytimes. And I hope that any of the people watching or listening take away a small sort of thought process that maybe they didn't think before, and can share that in their networks. And obviously, Migdal and Manor are here to support anybody that is in the Jewish community that has experienced some form of sexual abuse more recently or in the past. And my trustees would love me to also say that obviously we run entirely on donations and grants. So we are always open.
Well, I think a couple of years ago, your very future was in question, was it not? Yeah.
It was. And it's been a long slog, but we are doing okay. But the more donations we have, the more people we can help, and the more counselling we can provide. So it is quite literally a constant chain reaction. And so yes, we've got a donate link on our website if you would like to donate. If you've got any queries, you can ping us an email, and we are always happy to get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
Nice to see you all.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you for your
Bye-bye.
time.